So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with 5 Night at Freedy. So let's start the series. Sakura reclined in a simple yet cozy rolling chair in the middle of a claustrophobic and stuffy office. A desk in front of her was littered with papers, trash, and antique trinkets that had likely been left there by the shift before her. These people were slobs, for real. There was also a strange-looking cupcake with eyes on it, scary. She was sitting in the security office of Freddy Fazbear's Ramen Palace, which was located in a small village in a small country and was reportedly well known among the locals for its food, entertainment in the form of bizarre animal-shaped puppets, and its dark past. It seems that a few murders occurred there, and although the management was reportedly still trying to deny it, it was talked about everywhere. Oddly enough, though, that didn't stop people from visiting or even breaking in. She was here because the management decided to stop being cheap and sent a C-rank mission to Konoha to guard the place from midnight to 6 am. Normally, she would laugh at this kind of work, but she could be instrumental in stopping a murderer, so she accepted Tsunade's request. In addition, if things were as slow as she thought they would be, she would have some time to study some scrolls that Tsunade gave her. After all, she was only in her second year of apprenticeship, and she still had a long way to go before she could become a medic nin of Tsunade's caliber. She had it all planned out. She would simply unwind, use the room's power sparingly, and check the cameras every 10 to 15 minutes to minimize the energy drain. That was a big deal. It seems that the people were so frugal that they couldn't afford a good generator for night shifts, so she was only able to use a certain amount of power, but that was okay because she was a medic and a ninja. She was also good at stretching things out and conserving supplies. The office phone rang just as she was settling in and ready to make her first round of the restaurant. She was startled to see who it might be. She was about to take up the receiver when a voice said, "Oh, that was interesting. Hello, hello. I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night." Recorded? I actually worked in that office before you. As a matter of fact, I'm finishing up my last week now, so, I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll do fine, so, let's just focus on getting you through your first week, okay? Very interesting, and very kind of this man. It's kind of a legal thing, you know. Well, let's see. First there's an introductory greeting from the company that I'm supposed to read. Of course, this is the case. Why did bigwigs give legal speeches? Well, welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Ramen Palace, a magical place for kids and adults alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. Of course they wouldn't be, but figures would be concerned about that. A missing person report will be filed within 90 days, or as soon as property and premises have been thoroughly cleaned and bleached, and the carpets have been replaced. Wait, what was that last part? Blah blah blah. I realize that sounds awful. Sounds awful. That was really awful, wasn't it? But there's really nothing to worry about. The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night. What? But do I blame them? No, if I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too. Irritable, what do you mean? So, keep in mind that kids have a particular place in their hearts for these characters, and we should respect them a little, okay? Just so you know, the characters do have a tendency to wander around a little. They are left in a free roaming mode at night, and there's a story about their servos locking up if they are left off for too long. However, there was the bite of 87, so what? Yeah, It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know. What? Now concerning your safety, the only real risk to you as a night watchman here, if any, is the fact that these characters, if they happen to see you after hours probably won't recognize you as a person, they'll most likely see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on. Wait, did he pause for a moment? On the majority? Why would he be hesitant? Furthermore, how could they believe that I was an endoskeleton? An endoskeleton, what is it? Now since that's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit, okay? Why is that bad? In addition to being degrading? Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with crossbeams, wires, and animatronic devices, especially around the facial area, so, you could imagine how having your head forcefully pressed inside one of those could cause a bit of discomfort and death. The only parts of you that would likely see the light of day again would be your eyeballs and teeth when they pop out the front of the mask. Of course, what is animatronic? Why yeah, they don't tell you these things when you sign up, you ask. Why? But hey, first day should be a breeze. I'll chat with you tomorrow. Check those cameras, and remember to close the doors only if absolutely necessary. Gotta conserve power. Alright, good night. Fantastic, just fantastic. She had to worry about 3 deadly animals that were evidently more than just ordinary puppets, in addition to potential killers and punks. C rank her ass. This was B rank at the very least. She groaned and rubbed her eyes with her thumb and index finger. Oh well, it shouldn't be too difficult. Just cut the intervals between checks to 5 to 10 minutes. She also definitely shouldn't read the scrolls. After all, how horrible could it be? God, why didn't she ask more questions during that quick tour? They seemed pretty huge, but the facility wasn't small, and it would take time to get to her office, that is, if they made it over here. She had assumed they were only backstage puppets, but now it appeared they were, what was that word? Animatronic? And made their own move. What? Why was she even paying attention to this? She was a ninja, so she could read between the lines, but it sounded like something too crazy to be true. This probably happened before, and not just the bite the guy mentioned. In addition, she had witnessed some crazy things and the seemingly impossible occurred during her career and time with Naruto, so why couldn't this happen? A puppet could move without strings, after all, if a ship could fly without wings. She glanced at the clock and realized that she had missed some of her sweeps. She swiftly raised the small viewing screen for the night watchman, which was really lovely and resembled something from Spring Country. She first looked at the show stage where the 3 animals were, and then she froze. She yelled, "Where's the rabbit?" and began searching through the cameras right away. When she saw the purple-suited creature in the dining room, it was simply standing there, but it seemed to be looking around. Alright, that was strange, so they could actually move on their own. She then reviewed the other cameras just in case, pausing at the show stage to make sure the other 2 were still there. After that, she put the tablet down, and the screen shut off as soon as it was placed on her lap. There was more to this than she initially believed, but she couldn't panic because it was still early. Even though the clues told her that the things could kill her if they got close, they might not even come down here and instead wander aimlessly. Yes, it was probably entirely random, and that made sense. It was about as sensible as a company cleaning up after any potential murders before filing a missing persons report. That's why completing the task for at least a week was one of the prerequisites. She inhaled deeply and said, "No, no, don't get too upset." She needed to keep her wits about herself and stay sharp. She then inhaled again and began engaging in some chakra exercises. She would need to concentrate because, although she wasn't yet completely proficient in Tsunade's strength technique, she would be damned if she wasn't at least ready to push these things back. She checked the exhibit room a few minutes later, and both were still there. The rabbit remained in the dining area, which was fine. The rabbit puppet seemed content to stay in the dining area and supply closet, with the occasional trip to the beginning of the hall leading to her office. An hour into her vigil, the chicken began to roam as well. She seemed to enjoy the kitchen and restrooms, and boy, was that chicken noisy in that kitchen. That became the habit. Sakura would exercise to keep herself calm and check the cameras. She stayed around the 6-7 minute mark. Her first near miss occurred 2.5 hours in. She had been concentrating on using her chakra when she heard the quiet footsteps. If they had been ninja, she would have placed them at high genin or low chunin, but since they were so loud, she could only hear them because she was accustomed to the sound. The only thing here were the animatronics, and those were big and bulky, so there was no way they could be quiet. Then the footsteps stopped outside her door, so she reached out and pressed the light button. The rabbit was standing in the doorway, staring at her, but appeared to be motionless. She calmly released the light button and pressed the door button. She watched the cameras as it thudded into position and saw that the power output was rather high. Really? Does the cost of the doors include power? He cautioned against their use for that reason. All right, noted. The chicken was at the start of the hall. She inhaled, put the screen down, and looked at the window to her left. After a few minutes, she waited and clicked the lights button, but nothing was visible in the window. She then pressed the door button and the hall was illuminated once more, but nothing was visible. She examined the cameras. Okay, the rabbit is back in the supply closet, and the chicken, oh no, oh God, it's okay, it might just be a random thing, after all they have no one guiding them, and they seem to go away too, so it shouldn't be a big deal, she said as she turned quickly to her right, pressed the light button, and nearly screamed. The chicken was almost in her office. The next 3.5 hours were stressful. She cut down her break times between looks to 4 minutes, and she had to close both doors 4 more times. By 6 in the morning, she was nervous and on 5% power. Those things had persisted, especially that chicken, which seemed to detest leaving the door once it appeared. The bunny kept coming, and although it wouldn't stay long, he was 4 of her 6 door shuts. She would need to deal with them more effectively, and she needed to devise a plan. When she wasn't surrounded by 2 enormous puppets, or animatronics, whatever you call them, and animals, she was exhausted. Later in the afternoon, when she woke up, she would send a message to her teacher with a report, letting her know what was going on and asking around about this part of 87. That might be important, maybe asking more about these murders, but that was for tomorrow. Now, it was time to return to the room that was being paid for her, sleep, and possibly eat something small. She hardly had any of her snacks, and she wasn't going to touch whatever unhealthy crap they served there because things got so busy. Yes, it sounded excellent. She would be refreshed tomorrow after a small dinner and some sleep, and she would devise a plan to deal with those two. However, she had to question why Freddie hadn't become active. And according to the camera, what was behind that curtain? A pirate's cove? What was it? What was a pirate, anyway? What exactly were those things? How significant could that be, after all, when she would learn more tomorrow? Although it was peak hours, she was amazed at how busy the place was. Unlike last night, when everything was so dark and deserted, the kids were running around and playing games or chatting while eating ramen. Some of them wandered over to Pirate Cove and stared glumly at the closed curtains, while others stood in front of the stage where the bear, rabbit, and chicken would sing and move in what she could only assume was some sort of dance. The children seemed to love those things. They were moving on their own, and she couldn't explain why voices were coming from them, but she did receive a pre-recorded message and there were speaker systems, so that was explained. They were also on a schedule, so the recorded lines probably were as well, which is why they didn't say anything last night, which was good. She stared at those things. The stage they were on was very open, and there was no one there, nor was there the light shine of chakra threads. However, it seemed unlikely that anyone could explain how they moved or how these slightly jerky objects somehow become ninja stealthy. Then again, what seemed behind that curtain? Perhaps a brief look. The voice of her guide from yesterday called, "Sakura. What are you doing here? Not trying to quit, are you?" One of the day watches, damn, she was just about to open the curtain a bit. She turned around and said, "Nope, not that I could if I wanted to, contracts and all that. Actually I had some questions about the animatronics, I think I heard them being called." "What does that mean?" And, how do they move?" she said, smiling amiably. "Oh well, maybe this was a good time to get some more information." Her guide breathed a sigh of relief. "Some of your questions are likely above my pay grade, but I will answer what I can. Come on, I could use a bit of a break, I'll tell you over ramen." Although she wasn't a huge fan of ramen, it couldn't hurt to eat a bowl, if only to be courteous, so she followed him with a glad smile. The ramen wasn't horrible here, not as excellent as at home, but still not bad, and the watchman was able to answer a decent number of her questions, so it had been really fun and educational. He had been vague at the time, and she didn't follow up because it didn't seem important. He had also told her how they were able to talk, and she had been right, pre-recorded messages and a time switch. It was probably a little more complicated than that, but it was good to know that a guess was pretty much right. An animatronic was a metal puppet with some kind of motor that allowed it to activate and move on its own. It was really fascinating, but from his perspective, the basic movements that the animals made on stage were about what they could do. She had a to-go box full of rice balls on the desk because she needed at least one hand to operate the screen, lights, and doors, and she didn't want Naruto's ramen-heavy diet. It turned out that a fourth character had also been decommissioned, so the thing wasn't going to be wandering around anytime soon. However, the conversation had also brought up the fact that outside food was prohibited, so if she got hungry, she needed to get something from the kitchen, and they would pay attention for her to grab something before shift. As she began to settle in, the phone rang. Oh. Was there anything more the guy from last night had warned her about? Hello. Hello. Well, if you're hearing this and you made it today too, congrats. Yay for me. I won't talk quite as long this time since Freddie and his friends tend to become more active as the week progresses. What? It might be a good idea to peek at those cameras while I talk just to make sure everyone's in their proper place, you know. Oh no. She had a plan, so she would not rely on the screen. She would focus, calm down, listen in the hallways, and use the lights. She might occasionally check the screen to check for power and see if anyone was foolish enough to try to break in, but she would mostly use her senses to save power. They were quiet, but she was a trained ninja. Her hand jerked toward the screen, but she stopped it and took a breath. Interestingly enough, the bear himself doesn't come off stage very often. I heard he becomes a lot more active in the dark though, so, hey, I guess that's one more reason not to run out of power, right? Yes, it was. He wanted to deal with as few of them as possible. I also want to emphasize the importance of using your door lights. There are blind spots in your camera views, and those blind spots happen to be right outside of your doors, he said. He had already figured that out, but thanks. So if you can't find something, or someone, on your cameras, be sure to check the door lights. You might only have a few seconds to react. There was more than enough time. Not that you would be in danger, of course, I'm not implying that, he said. Also, check on the curtain in Pirate Cove from time to time. Why? It has been retired. The character in there seems unique in that he becomes more active if the cameras remain off for long periods of time. What? I'm sure you have everything under control, but I suppose he doesn't appreciate being observed. I'll speak with you soon. She grabbed the screen and flipped over to Pirate Cove, where the curtain was open and a fox-like creature was staring out almost directly at the camera. Her blood cooled as she stared at the face peeking out, then she shook herself out of her reverie and flipped over to the show stage, where she froze once more. The chicken and bunny were gone, so she swiftly cycled through the cameras, located them, and put the screen down. She had assumed it would be simple, just listen for the two annoying ones and respond appropriately, but it couldn't be that simple. Now one of their friends was going to join in on the fun, and damn it, she had to use the screen, if only to observe this newcomer and devise a new strategy. Her heart was racing. She reached out and picked up a rice ball, took a deep breath, and then bit it. She needed to calm down, so she swallowed and looked at Pirate Cove once more. Nothing had changed, so she put the screen down and sent chakra to her ears. She picked up nothing from either hall, which was also good, but just in case she checked both lights and nothing was there, she sighed in relief. Well, it shouldn't be too difficult. She should use the tablet to check on the fox, if that's what it was, and use her ears and lights for the other two. Yeah, she could do that. She could use her control to keep a small amount of chakra going to her ears to improve her hearing all night long, just enough to pick up the soft signs of their quiet footfalls, so she would hear them approach down the hallway. That would save battery power to check on the fox quickly, and the lights to make sure they were there in case she became distracted. She was a little behind on power usage right now, but she could make up for it. The animals were quiet, but not quite quiet enough. She had to be careful because those doors were loud, and the covered-up sound was a little too good for her taste. She picked up the screen and quickly glanced at the fox and the rest of the screen. The fox had moved to the shadows in front of the curtains about an hour ago, and he appeared to be studying the camera, waiting, and no one had broken in, which was to be expected. She glanced at the power and saw that she had 48% left. She lowered the screen, leaned back in her chair, and reached for another rice ball. They weren't bad, but they were much better than nothing. This wasn't so bad anymore. Sure, she was still paranoid, and yes, there was still a chance that something would try to kill her, but she was in her element, knew what to do, and had a good plan that seemed to be working pretty well. If she could continue this for a few days, she would be free to go home, and even if they stepped up their game, she was confident she could keep up. She finished the little morsel and picked up the screen again. It was time for another Fox update. Just checking one room quickly was good for saving power. Her chakra-powered ears picked up the sounds of heavy footsteps moving at crazy speeds, not ninja speeds, but close enough, and she almost dropped the screen when she brought up Pirate Cave. The fox was gone, but it wasn't too bad because they all wandered. She quickly flipped through the cameras to find it, and she saw it in the West Hall. With reflexes sharpened from training, she slapped the door release, causing the door to close with a clunk. After a screech, the footsteps slowed and appeared to change to a skidding sound. Then, something large and heavy struck the door with force and speed, causing her to jump and stare at it. There was a brief period of silence before the fast footfalls resumed, this time moving away from the door. Sakura gulped and took a few deep breaths before opening the door and checking the lights. All right, he was truly gone. Wait, she was having déjà vu. She quickly turned around and hit the door light on the opposite side. Nothing. Oh, well, good. She leaned down and picked up the screen to check on the fox. It was back behind the curtain, but it was open. She couldn't help but think he looked disappointed. No, that must have been her imagination. When she heard a sound she really didn't want to hear, she abruptly lowered the screen. She heard slow, quiet footsteps coming down the hallway from both sides, and they were going for a pincer. Usually, one of them came down at the same time, but she didn't care. She waited for the footsteps to stop right in front of the doors before slamming them both down without first checking the lights. As she checked Pirate Cove's video, she swallowed a knot in her throat. Alright, he hadn't moved, but wow, both doors used a lot of power. She still had extra, but she reached for a rice ball and saw the box was empty after grabbing the bottle of water she had with her and taking a long gulp. Really? She didn't even touch her food the night before and just gobbled all her groceries tonight. Well, that's why she brought the snacks in anyway. The bunny always seemed to come from the left, so she heard it go. She opened the door and checked the light, but nothing was there. She checked the light on her right, but the chicken was still staring at her. She let go of the light and scowled as she looked at the empty rice ball box. She assumed it was stress, but she also had more time to eat than she had last night because she wasn't in a panic. Perhaps she should get a larger box the next time. The ladder was about to pull out, but for some reason this was really hungry work. As she extracted a bag of nuts, she checked Pirate Cove again, not wanting the fox bum to rush again, and she found herself blinking in surprise. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a storage full of various items that the company wouldn't want her having in the building, including emergency supplies like explosive tags, kunai, ninja wire, soldier pills, and snacks. She looked at her power and swore as she turned to check if the chicken was there. It wasn't, but she opened the door anyway. It wasn't an impressive song, more of an off-tune ditty, but he was decommissioned. His dialogue shouldn't even have been on a timer, let alone timed to play this late. However, she had a reserve, and that's why she had one. For things like this, it had still been surprising. She might want to inquire about that, but first she would have to survive the night, and to do so, she would have to make sure she properly rationed her power, which shouldn't be difficult at this point. By the end of her shift, she still had 10% of her power left, and the chicken and rabbit continued to visit, but she could still hear them. It seemed that her new strategy would be her best option, she just needed to perfect it and stick to it for the remainder of the week. She had plenty of power, but not a lot of food, which was going to be an issue. She might also need to make sure she had plenty of water. Less panicking, but high stress would likely continue to cause more hunger and thirst, not to mention that the back room was rather warm. Those were thoughts for tomorrow. Even though she was watching, Sakura still couldn't believe it. At the moment, all three of them moved erratically, and there was a faint noise as their internal parts squeaked with each movement. Although their movements appeared to be very limited, she knew that they could be much quieter, and even though she had never seen them move through the halls, she was certain that they were much more fluid in their motions than this. In addition, the fox, which was supposed to be motionless at all, was able to sing and run quite easily. The fox ran, the rabbit stayed to the left and the supply closet, the chicken enjoyed going into the kitchen, and the bear was always in the back. Why? It must have been something in their programming or whatever they called it. They were all supposed to have a personality of some kind. If she didn't know any better, she would assume that they were hiding their potentials. But from whom? And why? In fact, how could they? They weren't alive, right? No, she wasn't going to touch that question, but she had to ask, why? The day watchman who had been her guide had helped her a lot by now, so she considered going to him, but she felt that he wouldn't be able to help her much on this subject. Yes, he told her about how they operated, but he didn't seem to care about the personalities or who they were supposed to be. It might take some time, but she had plenty of time before her shift, so she decided to go with the only other viable option, the customers, both adults and children. She glanced around the ramen palace, which was once again packed. However, she had to remember to pick up an extra large order of rice balls. That had been very educational, and she had been able to gain a better understanding of the characters of her metal opponents. First of all, it would appear that in addition to singing songs and sharing stories about his pirating days, a pirate was actually a bandit who used boats rather than roads. The fox began all of his performances by running from his location in Pirate Cove to the dining area to the cheers and applause of the kids. The reason he stopped was because the parents thought he was too eerie or frightening for the kids, and the fact that he had multiple exposed metal parts didn't help. The irony was that the kids adored him despite his exposed parts. Those facts readily explained the routes they took and why they stayed in particular rooms. The others were much more obvious. The bunny advocated for safety and care, mostly cleaning up messes, making sure instruments were in tune, and keeping the stage clear, among other things. The chicken was a party girl, though it was depicted as a she. She enjoyed eating, singing, dancing, and having a good time. More than that, the bear was the band's leader and announcer, letting people know when the parties were and when one of the acts was about to start. Had she not realized that everything was prearranged, she might have assumed that he had arranged the schedules and all the acts, which could explain why he hadn't pursued her. It wasn't his responsibility to get her, he was only there to make sure the others did. Or perhaps, if the warning she received the night before was accurate, he could have easily gotten her by getting her to waste power. In addition to all of that, there had been a second generation of these. The current models had been replaced by models that were cleaner, more kid-friendly, and had the ability to walk around. It turned out that the current models had been upgraded when the newer models and the location they starred in went under. It had a vixen that was supposed to replace the fox. Apparently, it hadn't been nearly as popular as the male counterpart. Poor thing had apparently been left to the mercy of ruthless kids to do with as they pleased. As of right now, the new models, all of them, were gone. With a sigh, she placed the big box of rice balls and 2 bottles of water on the desk and picked up the screen. After making sure nothing had moved, she leaned back in the chair and sighed lightly. She had a plan, so even though it would only be her second night using it, it should still work unless something major happened. She was thinking about change, and if she didn't hear it, the phone should ring it around. The phone began to ring. All right, hey, hi. You're doing fantastic. Most people don't last this long, is that right? I mean, they usually move on to other things by now. I'm not implying that they died, that's not what I meant. I mean, it hasn't been that bad. Anyway, I better not take up too much of your time. Things start getting real tonight. Bring it. Hey, listen, here's my idea. If you get caught and don't want to be put in a Freddie suit, try acting like you're dead. Go limp. Then, there's a chance that, maybe they'll think you're an empty costume instead. However, if they think that, they might try to stuff a metal skeleton into you. I wonder how that would work. Well, whatever, forget that. It's better to avoid being caught. Okay, I'll let you handle it. I'll see you on the other side. She wasn't sure how to feel about that last part. On the one hand, it sounded like bad advice that wouldn't make much of a difference in her situation, but on the other hand, the way he said it gave the impression that he had tried it before, successfully, if he was still breathing. Those things did seem to go away when it got to be 6, so perhaps it would buy her valuable seconds or minutes, but on the other hand, perhaps it was best to just avoid being caught. She sighed again and looked at her charges. The fox was still behind the curtains, which was good. The chicken and bunny were already out and about, which was to be anticipated. However, the bear was once again staring at the camera and remained still. What? She glanced back at the screen and blinked. Yes, it was staring straight at the camera. That was unsettling. She turned back to face the pirate and put the screen down, chakra already in her ears. She wasn't going to waste any more energy staring at something odd. They wouldn't catch her off guard like that anymore. She reached out and picked up a rice ball. The night was going to be long, but she was prepared. She heard movement to her right as she was eating. Were they already moving? She nodded to herself and lowered the screen, taking a moment to eat another mouthful of rice before closing the door on her right, keeping herself and the robotic chicken standing just outside of it apart. Then she took a water bottle, opened it, and took a long swallow. This was getting easy, so what could possibly go wrong now? She looked down at the screen as she listened to see if the chicken was going to be an actual threat or not. The fox wasn't feeling all that excited, so he was still behind his curtains. Sakura squeezed and crossed her legs as she glanced at the screen again. That damn fox was waiting in the shadows. It was 4 in the morning, and something was wrong. She still had a lot of water and rice balls, but she had been eating more of both than she had yesterday, which caused her problem. She really needed to use the restroom, and she wasn't sure she could last 2 hours. She put the screen down and tried to concentrate on something other than her bladder. The fox had rushed her once earlier and was already getting ready for the next run, so it wasn't really working. The other two had also been very active, coming to her door multiple times, but in the last half hour or so, there had been no activity, and they didn't seem to be getting close, which increased her anxiety as the tension mounted. That building wasn't good for her bladder, which already needed attention from all the water she had been drinking to stay cool and wash down all those rice balls. Although the second didn't seem to be an issue, the first might be because the fox didn't stay in the room at all, so it could come in, see she wasn't there, and then go look for her. She took another breath, but she couldn't wait, she would just have to take that risk. She didn't want to leave while something was waiting for her, like the fox, because she didn't want to risk returning to find an ambush. She took another breath and got up from her chair slowly. Then she put chakra into her feet and walked up the wall onto the ceiling, crouching to stay close to it. Oh, that hurt her bladder a lot, but it also helped to relieve some of the pressure. Leaving the security room was probably dangerous, but hopefully being on the ceiling would lessen the risk. She practically crawled along the upside-down surface, moving slowly enough to be able to keep an eye out for any lurkers in the hallway, despite her body telling her to hurry. She was in a hurry to enter a stall and didn't even consider sealing the door or finding a way to keep it closed in case something wanted to enter after her. It wasn't until several minutes later, after she had finished her business, calmed down, cleaned her hands, and freshened up a little that she glanced at the bathroom door and cursed herself. Oh well, it was much too late to worry about it now, and if they were nearby, they would obviously know where she was now. She shook her head and began climbing the wall next to the door, making sure to grab the handle and begin opening it as she went. When she reached the ceiling, she made sure to release her hold on the top of the door and slip through. She then let the door close on its own as she began to move quickly down the hall, keeping an eye out for any trouble. Though it sounded much closer, she blinked to herself, thinking she might have imagined it. Her instinct told her to look and double-check, so she turned slightly and looked over her shoulder. It was the faintest of whispers that caught her attention, the softest of noises like a leaf falling upon the grass several yards away. She was about to turn around and go on her way again when her instincts detected something that her brain had missed, 2 pinpricks of light in the dark, almost dead center in the hallway, far too high up to have a logical source, and as she stared at those pinpricks, her eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, forming a large outline, a familiar shape, and if she wasn't upside down, she was certain that all the blood and color would drain from her face. It was the bear, and it was several feet away from her. Even with chakra-enhanced hearing, she nearly missed it. Then it started to approach her as a jingle began to play. She promptly fell from the ceiling and ran as fast as she could, using all of her training in sending chakra to her legs to move at speeds that a normal civilian couldn't hope to achieve. Before entering safety, she quickly reached the door and glanced over her shoulder to see how her pursuer was doing. She could still see the bear's dark outline as it approached her steadily, much faster than she had anticipated, not because it was moving quickly, but because it was covering a lot of ground. Then she remembered how large the animal was, which meant that it had a long stride and a long reach. She hurried through the doorway and slammed the button to close it behind her. She sighed with relief as she pressed her back against the heavy metal slab and allowed her knees to give way under her as she began to pant. She wasn't tired or worn out, but she wasn't nearly that out of shape anymore. Despite knowing what to look for and what to listen for, and even though she believed she knew what to expect, all of her plans, preparations, and precautions had been for nothing just moments ago. Every time she thought she had the hang of things, they threw the next shuriken in an arc. The bear was extra quiet, which was okay, just a little more chakra. It's not like it would be a big drain, just a pain, especially since the doors were already loud. As it was, she had already begun doing so and was certain she heard it walk away. She slowly stood up and pressed the light button, but there was no shadow or image in the window. She sighed again and opened the door to double-check, but nothing was there, so why did something feel off? As if she were forgetting something, she spun around in a panic and pressed the left light button. Clear. She grabbed up the screen and walked to Pirate Cove. The drapes were closed. The fox was howling a fairly melancholy tune, more like dejected than sad. If she didn't know any better, she would have assumed it was unhappy that she wasn't present when it raced in here, but if it truly intended to murder her. She took a deep breath through her nose and began to lean over to grab one of her remaining morsels, but she froze when a savory, warm, and salty scent hit her nose. She sank into her chair and shook her head, thinking, God, I need a rice ball right now. Her eyes turned to where the rice balls should have been, but they were replaced by something else. Where were her rice balls, and how had a bowl of steamy ramen ended up on her desk? How did this occur? The animatronics were the only ones supposed to be here with her, and even though she had seen them move and was confident they could do a lot, getting a bowl of ramen from the kitchen and putting it on the desk neatly didn't seem like one of those things, especially since she hadn't been gone for very long. They couldn't have come here, noticed she was gone, decided to change her food, gone to the kitchen, prepared or at least reheated said food, and then brought it back here before removing what was already on the desk before she returned. Ramen needed 2 hands, and she needed at least one to protect herself. In addition, you had to give ramen your whole attention or it would get everywhere and burn you. Did that make sense? Unless they were far smarter than she gave them credit and they were attempting to set her up. Was this a ruse? Or was she just overanalyzing the situation? Her stomach rumbled a little. How could she possibly be hungry at this moment? She moaned as she checked the clock and realized she still had about an hour and a half left. Since she was hungry and you shouldn't waste resources, she made sure she had enough chakra flowing to her ears, obtained another Fox update, and then took up the owl of ramen to begin working through it. Even though her charges had behaved well, her nerves were frayed by the time she clocked out. The bear hadn't even approached her again, or at least she hadn't heard him approach. The fox had hardly even peeked out his curtain, and seriously had hardly even walked down the halls. Still, she would have thought. Oh no. When it came to that damned bear, she was going to need to be extra cautious, time things, listen carefully, and perhaps pay attention to cameras a little more. No, she needed to calm down. It was okay, she had the power to do that, and she was doing very well in that department. However, she might want to reconsider how much water she was drinking. Yeah, she didn't need a repeat of tonight, she definitely didn't want a repeat, or worse. She shuddered as she walked to her hotel room. She simply needed to try harder. Correct? Sakura muttered a curse as she rushed into the security office, setting down her box of rice balls and water. She sighed with relief as she glanced at the desk clock before letting out another choice curse. She was unable to fall asleep after returning to the apartment because of that stupid bear, and when she did, she was still sleeping in due to a fitful sleep. In addition, her mind had been racing about the bear and its ninja-like stealth, so she went over a number of scenarios and backup plans in an attempt to think of something that would neutralize the damn thing. She was certain she had a few things, but in the process of coming up with them, she almost missed her work. It was a shabby job that paid far less than it should have, but that didn't really matter to her. She was unhappy because she really didn't want to be caught in the dark in the hallways again. Thank you. She wanted to relax and take a few deep breaths because her nerves were already raw. She had a few minutes before. When the phone rang, she almost leaped from her seat and onto the ground. What was he talking about? Hello. Hey, wow, day 4, I knew you could do it, thank you. Hey, listen, I may not be around to send you a message tomorrow. What was that sound? What did it sound like? A banging? It's been a bad night here for me. I am kinda glad that I recorded my messages for you, when I did. Wait, no. You're not serious. Hey, do me a favor, maybe sometime, you could check inside those suits in the back room? I'm gonna to try to hold out until someone checks, maybe it won't be so bad, uh, I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there, oh, no dash. She heard a bear's last request and listened to his last moments while sitting in numb silence. Her mind struggled to process the information for a few moments, and when it did, panic struck. Near the end, she heard the bear's song and jingle, followed by an unearthly screech, static, and finally the phone turning off. What could she do? They had gotten him, they had persevered, they had learned, they had won, a man who had been aware of their techniques and had lived through them much longer than she had. What could she really do that the man on the phone couldn't do to stop them all? She was doomed, doomed. Every move she made was met with resistance. No, she couldn't panic, she had plans, she had contingencies, they couldn't counter everything, therefore she had to calm down and check the cams, she said after giving herself a hard slap. She quickly checked on Pirate Cove using the handheld screen, cursing again, only to find the fox peering from behind the curtains. Backstage, she was met with Freddie staring back at her, as if to let her know that she was next. They had already taken care of one night guard, so they would now take care of number 2. No, she wouldn't allow them to. She glared at the bear and then put the screen down. Her ears were already supercharged, and she could hear movement down the hall, but it didn't approach. She calmed down even more. She took a rice ball in her hand and stared at it. Using just chakra, she made it float above her palm, and then she thought of another idea that caused it to begin spinning like a leaf in the academy. If she could do something like this, she could accomplish anything, she just needed to remain calm. By 2 o'clock, she felt better, and everything had returned to its usual rhythm from the previous few nights. She didn't feel the need to check the back room for the bear's departure, and she was confident that she would hear him if he did. The fox was standing in the shadows, and the chicken and rabbit had already taken their chances a few times, but it was okay, her ears had done the trick, and they would keep doing so. She turned to her right and grinned as she heard the bear approaching. He couldn't have come as a surprise because she had him, and he would be locked out like the others. Then she heard the faintest of whispers, and she heard quiet footsteps that didn't reveal anything. Then the sound stopped, and she was certain that he was going to do something far down the hall. She cringed as the sound hit her ears, and then that dumb jingle began to play. Why would he do that? He had a lot of stealth, so why would he destroy it with such unnecessary music? She shook her head and looked at the door for 30 seconds before turning back to her computer and shrugging, thinking that at least it would be easier to hear him coming. She checked on the pirate for a moment, then scowled. Okay, he really needs to turn that down, it's so loud I can't hear myself. Oh no, she had a terrible revelation. Thinking she was mistaken, she hurried to her right, pressed the light button, and gazed at the chicken standing in the doorway. She forcefully closed the door. The bunny gazed down at her as she turned left and looked at the door light. She also slammed that door. Her greatest advantage, her hearing, had been neutralized, and she had no backup plans, so she slumped back in her chair and tried her best not to hyperventilate. She removed the chakra from her ears, realizing it was no longer useful. He was the Jonin, and the others were his Genin or Chunin team. They went out and tried to get her, and he watched, learned her habits, and then took action to exploit them. Now it all made sense, why he stayed back, why the bear stayed on stage, and why he was similar to Kakashi for Team 7. She was up against an experienced team that knew exactly how to plan their attacks, not outdated animatronics. Panic struck again, and she realized she would have to use her old strategies once more, using the cameras to try to predict their movements. This was an ineffective strategy, but it seemed to be all she had. She was startled out of her panic by a loud smash to her left. The fox had forced her to move. How long had she had both doors down, for heaven's sake? She opened the doors after quickly checking the lights one more time, then took a quick look around Pirate Cove and her power. Is she going to make it? Oh no, 40%, no 38, and it was 3. That jingle was still playing in the background as she quickly swept the camera around to find each animatronic. Would she survive the night? Is 38% sufficient? It was going to be necessary. Sakura instinctively reached for a rice ball after wiping perspiration from her brow, only to be reminded that she had already run out. This time, she didn't even curse. Instead, she simply looked back at the screen in front of her. She saw that there were only 10 minutes left and that the power was only 3%. She quickly looked at the cameras, but they weren't close to her, and the fox was behind his curtains. 2% power. After putting the screen down, she noticed that the music had stopped. She cautiously reinserted chakra into her ears, but she heard nothing. She swallowed and looked at the camera once more. 1% power. Was there a sound? She set the screen aside and looked to her right. Did she hear something? Was she having hallucinations? She looked at the light on the door, then everything became dark. 0% power. How much time was left? Her eyes widened. What happened to the animatronics? All of her preparations and safeguards had been in vain, and in a state of desperation, she did the only thing that came to mind. She pumped chakra into her ear to try to pinpoint any movement coming her way, closed her eyes, and went limp in her chair. She worked hard to control her breathing so that her chest moved as little as possible. She had to buy herself time, priceless minutes and seconds, because they always left her alone at precisely 6 o'clock. She just hoped that things would remain the same. They stopped at the door, and a soft, gentle whirring told her that some part of it, maybe the head, was moving. That stopped soon too, and then it was quiet again. She struggled to keep her breathing even and small. She didn't know how long she stayed like that, in the dark, in the silence, but finally she heard it, the sound that made her blood turn to ice water, the gentle whisper of footfalls, slow, steady, and meaningful. She almost jumped and shouted as the jingle began, but she managed to calm herself. It might have been a test, and once the bear realized she was motionless, it might leave. Even if it went to retrieve a metal skeleton, it would take time, and she sorely needed time. The song went on, but then the alarm went off, and the music stopped suddenly. What company, really, thought that kids cheering was a good way to signal the end of a shift? Tonight, she made the decision not to question that. She opened her eyes and listened intently. Her eyes rapidly adapted to the darkness. She realized that nothing was there and that she was secure. She released a breath she was unaware she was holding, and by God, she survived another night. Sakura required answers, answers that she had foolishly assumed were unimportant up until this point. She needed to learn more about the murders that people talk about, more about the history of this place, why it had closed so many times before, and most importantly, what had happened to the man who had left all those phone messages. She needed to see for herself what had happened to him, not to report it because they would still wait, but because he had wanted someone to find him. If she was correct in assuming that these things had a cruel sense of humor, which she was certain of, she even knew where to look first. That's why she was sneaking into Pirate Cove and hiding behind the curtains, rather than yelling in fear when she saw the fox in person. She really should have anticipated that. It wasn't active, though, because it was still daylight, which was good, very good. Now, just go around to the back of it, and look there we go, open it up, and, oh God, there was a body in here, and based on the blood and what little was identifiable, the person inside had been dead for less than 24 hours. This was him, this was the guy, and she had been right. She was only able to close the suit and leave because she had been training under Tsunade. She was only able to walk through the restaurant with a straight face because she had been Tsunade's apprentice for a year, and she was only able to enter the bathroom, find a stall, close the door, lock it, and kneel in front of the toilet before she emptied her stomach of its contents because she had been in the therapeutic program for 2 years. It took her a few heartbreaking minutes to even consider getting up from her knees and flushing the toilet, after which she went to the sink to try to wash as much of the vomit taste out of her mouth as she could. It had been a horrible sight, with the body twisted and the head completely turned to paste. She could only hope it had happened quickly, but if not, she shuddered at the thought, realizing that she needed to be more cautious because that could have been her last night and tonight. She leaned heavily onto the sink, but she couldn't think that way because it would lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy where she would die. She regained her composure and turned to face the door. She had to return to the outside world and learn as much as she could about the reality. It might not help, but she had to know, someone had to. She was in no condition to be here, but here she was, her mind still reeling from the sobering reality that she had discovered. Sakura staggered into the office, nearly dropping her box of rice balls and bottle of water onto the desk before crashing into the chair. Children were at the center of everything, including dead children. As if that weren't horrible enough, when the second generation of robots appeared, the man who killed 5 children in the first location with the original animatronics, who was theorized to be the same person, killed more children in spite of the increased security. This was followed by the infamous bite incident, in which one of the animatronics, whose identity has long since been forgotten, bit a guard and severed their frontal lobe, which led to the current situation. However, she had been told a small tid, near the end of the second generation's life, when they were all permitted to roam the halls during the day, they had begun to give the adults wary looks while still being happy around the children, and all the children had been killed at night. The phone did indeed ring, but it was not conceivable because the man was dead and she had seen his mutilated body, so he couldn't have. It was made worse by the fact that the robots had not only captured him but had also recorded it. Oh my goodness, the cameras. No words came over the phone's speakers, only jumbled gibberish. She picked up the screen, saw Fox peeking out, and realized that everyone had left the back room. Panic struck as she began to flip through the cameras, and when that damn melody began to play, she discovered the chicken and the bunny. She was so caught off guard that she dropped the screen into her lap and turned to face the door on her right, where the bear was already ready. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned to face ahead again, but something attracted her attention. She screamed as she turned to her right and saw a slouched, yellowish bear with its mouth hanging open and eyeless sockets peering into her soul. She raised the screen in front of her face in a desperate attempt to use it to protect herself from any attacks, but none materialized. She slowly lowered the small device to discover an empty room before her, and she sighed in relief before stiffening as instinct made her check the door lights on her right. Then, a panicked hand struck the door release, removing the chicken from her person. A quick check on her left revealed that everything was fine. She went for what was fast becoming her comfort meal with a trembling palm. What had it been? How had that golden bear entered this place? For what reason did it depart? What was happening? She took a bite of her lunch and chewed slowly while checking the door lights on both sides before allowing the door on the right to go up. Great, absolutely great, exactly what she didn't need, another piece of the enormous puzzle, another item to watch out for. She swallowed as she looked at the screen once again. It didn't matter, she had to stay alert and get through this. They couldn't get her, she had too much to do, she wouldn't die in a kid-only ramen palace. At 3 o'clock, her nerves were strained, she had almost run out of water and rice balls, and she realized how much she detested cameras. In addition to their inefficient use of power, they made her feel helpless and helpless. She could see where her questions were, but she was unable to stop or anticipate them, and it was occasionally difficult to determine whether the reason she couldn't find something was because she had missed it in her frantic search through the screens to conserve power or because that specific item was right outside her door. Her instincts, which have served her far better than the damn cameras, told her not to worry about it even though she was worried about missing something because the strange bear had not returned and there was no evidence that it had ever really existed. Her instincts had helped her turn on the lights and press the door buttons at the appropriate times. These same impulses began to yell at her at this very moment. She pressed the light button with a shaky, practiced gesture, but nothing happened. She blanched, pressed the button again, and nothing happened. No, no, no. The light wasn't working, why? It didn't matter, worry about that later, close the door now, she said in a panic. Her worry increased as she banged her palm against the door button and it stopped working properly. No, 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 no. She flew from her chair and began to back away from the open doorway. In the dark hallway, she could see the familiar silhouette of the chicken. She was unsure of how it had done it, but it had somehow sabotaged the door. She whimpered as she took another step back and collided with something very solid first. Her frightened mind needed a few moments to comprehend that, based on her location, she was in front of the left doorway and that the object she was pressing against was neither a door nor a wall. Just as she glanced down, she noticed a big purple arm around her torso from behind.